All right, everybody, happy Thursday and welcome to our show today. Welcome to our LEARNin 1031 Live. My name is Chris Astillero with Exchange Resources. Welcome to our show. All right, everybody, happy Thursday again. Welcome to our show. We have an amazing show for you today. We're going to be talking a little bit about 1031 exchanges, but before we dive in and get into our segment of the show, let's thank our sponsor. Located in Rancho Bernardo, we've been around for over 26 years and we've done over 60,000 tax-deferred exchanges. If you don't do a 1031 tax-deferred exchange, you could be faced with about 30 to 40% in taxes, right? Wouldn't you rather roll that over into the next property so that you can buy more with it? Well, we're here to give you your options. Let's talk. All right, thank you Exchange Resources for sponsoring the show today. So we're going to go over some of the basics of the 1031 exchange, how a 1031 exchange actually works, and how it acts as a tool, a powerful tool to actually build wealth and legacy for all of the investors in the United States. So some of the basic rules that we're going to go over is number one, the investor has to buy equal to or greater in value than what they are selling for. So if their list price is, let's say, $1.5 million, they have to buy equal to or greater than their net sales price. And so to arrive at that, let's say it's a $1.5 million list price and there are closing costs, non-recurring closing costs, commissions, transfer fees, escrow fees, title fees of about $100,000. So you take 1.5 minus $100,000 in non-recurring closing costs, and you arrive at a net sales price of $1.4 million. The investor, in order to fully defer their capital gains taxes, they have to buy equal to or greater than $1.4 million, roll over all of their gain, and also roll over their debt into the next property, which means on that $1.4 million property, if they have, let's say, a $400,000 gain, and then they have $1 million loan left, $400,000 has to be rolled over into the next property, and a new loan of $1 million has to be replaced on the replacement property. The investors can either bring in their own cash, they can get seller carryback financing, or they can just get a new loan. The second rule is that you have to buy like-kind property. The investor has to buy properties with the intent to hold those properties for the productive use of a trade or business, or hold it for investment purposes, which means that investors who are flipping properties do not qualify for a 1031 exchange because they're not holding that property with the intent to utilize it for long-term cash flow or hold it as an investment property. Flippers are considered dealers. Dealers basically increase the inventory on the market, thereby they're not qualified for a 1031 tax-deferred exchange. The third rule is that the same taxpayer selling must be the same taxpayer buying. In the eyes of the IRS, we are all known for our EIN number or our social security number. So there has to be consistency when the investor is selling. The vesting has to be the same when they're selling as when they're buying. So John and Mary Smith selling must be John and Mary Smith purchasing the property. If it's a single member LLC, which falls under the taxpayer social security number, that LLC selling must be the same LLC purchasing the property. The fourth rule is there's a timeline. The timeline is very strict. There's extensions are very rare unless there's a natural disaster. So even with the natural disaster and that the president has declared it a natural disaster zone, the investors still have to contact their CPA or the IRS to determine if they qualified for an extension. So the timelines are as follows. For a traditional 1031 tax deferred exchange, the investor normally puts their investment property, lists the property, it goes into escrow. As soon as it's in escrow, they contact the QI or a qualified intermediary, such as Exchange Resources, to put together the exchange before close of escrow. As soon as escrow closes on that relinquished property, the funds, the gains are all wired into Exchange Resources where we hold it in trust for the investor. Second thing that happens is that there's a 45-day timeline where the investor has to identify the property or properties that they wish to purchase within that 45-day time frame. As soon as that's done, the properties are locked in. They're ready to move forward with those properties. They have an additional 135 days to close on that replacement property. So a total of 180 days, with the first 45 days allowing the investor to identify up to 3 properties. So those are the basic rules of the 1031 exchange. It's been around for over 100 years. So many investors have used it as a powerful tool to diversify their investments, to consolidate properties into one property. And it's just a great tool to create wealth and to create a legacy for their families. We do have some questions right now that are coming up. How does a 1031 exchange help investors keep more of their money working for them? Very good question. So with the 1031 tax deferred exchange, it's all about buying power. Now, if you have an investor who does not want to do a 1031 exchange or didn't know that there was one that they could actually do, they're going to be paying about 30 to 40% of taxes. That's just going to disappear into the black hole, and they're not going to be able to utilize that in order to purchase another property. So without a 1031 exchange, there's about 30 to 40% in taxes that are going to be paid, and which reduces the buying power from 100% to about 60 to 70%. That extra 30 to 40% can be utilized to actually buy maybe one or more properties. So that is a great tool. Another question that we have is what types of opportunities can investors move into using a 1031 exchange? So another great question. A lot of people don't know that, when you're selling an investment property, say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family home that's a rental, that doesn't necessarily mean like kind is buying a 3-bedroom, 2-bath single family rental. You can actually buy different properties and mix and match land. You can buy commercial property, you can buy condos, you can buy a DST, which is what we're going to be going into later today, a Delaware Statutory Trust. So there's a lot of different ways that investors can actually create more wealth by diversifying, purchasing other properties, especially if they're in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they're still building up their wealth. This is an opportunity for them to look at other opportunities from other states and get a higher cash on cash return, higher rate of return. We've seen a lot of investors moving out of California and actually buying other properties in other states with a higher cash flow. And for the most part, many investors buy for cash, which significantly increases their cash flow. Last question. Why is a 1031 exchange considered a key strategy for growing a real estate portfolio? The reason why it is a key strategy is because that is what it's for. It helps create wealth. Investors can continue to exchange all throughout their life. And when they finally pass, after they've done all these exchanges, the heirs would actually receive a step up in basis which means that if I was the investor and I passed away today, my heirs would literally receive the property at fair market value. They can sell it the following day. And guess what? All those taxes are forgiven. So it's a great tool for creating that wealth, that legacy, and also, consistent cash flow for many investors who really don't want to manage properties anymore. And that's what we're going to dive into is the DST. So let's get into the next slide. And so we're going to talk about how DSTs help investors. We have a very special guest today, Erica Traulsen, who is an expert at talking about how DSTs help investors. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons and just, we're going to have a very easy conversation so that everybody understands how this works. Erica, welcome to the show. Please tell us a little bit about you and, your company.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. It's been a minute since I've been on the show. Those of you who've watched other LEARNin San Diego lives, you may know that I was on maternity leave. So I am back and I'm excited to teach all of you what I know about DSTs. So I am Erica Traulsen with Legacy Investments in Real Estate. And I am an expert on helping investors who want to go passive with their real estate who are facing significant capital gains. Now, you don't have to be facing significant capital gains, but that is the typical time when people are looking to go passive with their investments. They're ready to offload some of the pressure and stress of being a landlord, and that's what we help them do. And rather than diving more into that right now, we're going to pull up some slides, and I'll tell you about that with some info on the screen. So I'm going to talk to you right now about leveraging your 1031 exchanges to really maximize your investments. So as I mentioned, a lot of people are trying to go passive, but also, when you have these huge capital gains, your cash on cash return is not really significant. It can be that you bought the property low and it's been appreciating, especially somewhere in a market like San Diego. The appreciation extremely outgrows the rent growth, right? It's just exponentially higher appreciation than rent growth most of the time. So let's pull up our next slide and we'll start there. We'll give it a moment. Here we go. Oh, here's some disclosures. The main points here, of course, if you'd like to read all of this, we don't have time before the end of the show for you to read every single word, but you can screenshot it and read it or come back and read it later, hit pause. But the main points are that I can't offer official legal or tax advice, just real estate investing advice. So since Chris is the other one on the show, I'm going to ask him in this scenario. We all see investors making this face, whether you are a real estate investor yourself or you work with them. But this is my favorite thing to do. Complete that sentence. If you can believe it, this one time, Chris, fill in the blank with something you've heard from an investor.
Yeah, this one time I had a squatter in my complex and I couldn't get rid of them. Took a lot of money hiring an attorney just to get rid of this squatter. And this is rampant
we hear
in
that
California.
All the time.
Yeah.
The last place that I rented, 2000, I don't even know what year, long time ago in San Francisco when I was living up there. My landlord was facing with someone. She was, she filed for eviction. It took, I think, 5 months, and she had to pay the person to get out. She paid legal fees. She paid them like a $5,000 stipend, and they had like 5 months of free rent because you can't require rental income when you're evicting someone, I guess. So, it cost her thousands and thousands of dollars to get someone just to move out. We see that. We see the tenant trashed the place, and I had true story. One of my clients had a $30,000 turnover between tenants because of how this tenant treated the apartment, or a house, a single family home. $30,000 turnover. Deferred maintenance can also cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Ironically, another $30,000 story. One of my clients replaced a roof for $30,000 and then went, I don't want to do that on the other property. I'm going to sell it. So he sold before, he exchanged rather, before he would be faced with another roof replacement. Those are the things we hear all the time from investors. And it's just, that's probably not what you had in mind when you first got into investing in real estate. You want to maximize your income, and being faced with things like evictions, which cost money, turnover that costs money, just the growth the appreciation growth outweighing the rental growth. That's huge.
Yeah. And Erica, this is not a very landlord friendly state.
No.
So, I mean, obviously my mom has owned her building in LA since 1985, and she has to deal with the LAHD, Los Angeles Housing Department, and they're always enacting more laws to favor the tenants. And she's been managing these properties for quite a long time, and she's still going strong. But for most investors in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of them are just tired of getting those phone calls, right?
And those laws, they're in place for a reason. They're there to protect the renters from really greedy corporation landlords, but not the small mom and pop investor, for sure.
Yeah.
And it can hit hard. So, to touch on what DSTs are, they can be any type of these properties that are eligible for a 1031 exchange: multifamily apartment complexes, even build to rent communities, retail spaces, self-storage, we'll skip ahead, hotels, mineral rights, even medical facilities. These are all types of properties that DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts, can be. So a DST is kind of an envelope to hold a large scale property, and they're not a loophole. They're part of the tax code. So, a lot of people, the first thing I get asked is, this sounds too good to be true. And we say, I know it does, right? And the reason it sounds too good to be true is just because they aren't advertised. They're securitized real estate, securities, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, things like that, but also Delaware Statutory Trusts. And the reason being so that it's protecting the investor, protecting, your clients. And that means that they have to work with an investment advisor such as myself to invest in them. So we're a third party. We're looking at this with a different lens than maybe an investor normally would. We're helping them with their due diligence process along the way. My portfolio might have 25 to 40 DST properties in it at any given time. And the investor, if they're talking directly with the sponsor of these DSTs, the sponsors can make their DST sound like the best things in sliced bread, but each one would. So we're kind of a third party set of eyes just to make sure that everything is that we're going through the due diligence with them, and we're helping them hit their individual goals. Not only the highest cash flow, does that mean steady income, stable income? Are you looking for more appreciation or growth? Are you looking for something in specific states with specific tax laws that you're looking for? So we are helping as a third party to do that. And let's talk about some of the benefits on the next slide here. So this is how we help our investors go from being a landlord into building a legacy. So DSTs are high-end commercial real estate. So you saw multifamily, but we're not talking like 4-unit or 2-unit multifamily apartments. We're talking like really large-scale commercial, 250-unit, 400-unit apartment complexes, other commercial, so like retail spaces, all those things you saw on the other slide about what's eligible in a 1031 exchange. They are professionally managed by sponsors. The sponsors are responsible, the long and short of it, they're responsible for finding the properties, putting them into this package of a DST. They are real physical real estate, as you saw, multifamily, retail, yada, yada, but professionally managed properties. They purchase them, they finance them if there's financing necessary for the investors. They're managing them to make sure that they're getting you the best return possible, and eventually the disposition of the properties. You can do another 1031 exchange if that's the route you want to go. You can get into a diversified portfolio. So most of the time, you can have a minimum investment in a DST of about $100,000. So what does that mean when your client has $1 million property sale? Well, now, technically they could go into 10 DSTs with that, right? So if they are set at a minimum of 100,000 and you owned a duplex in San Diego, well, now you could own retail in 5 states in one DST portfolio. You could have a piece of a hotel in South Florida. You could have a piece of a self-storage complex in Ohio, so diversifying the portfolio, because you went from one investment with a large amount of equity into multiple investments with smaller amount of equity. You can diversify your risk, spread it across a few different things. And can we pull that slide back up really quick? So diversification is huge, though, for people looking to build their portfolio. With that comes that consistent income potential. So you are diversifying, even if a property dips down a little bit, let's say in a duplex, one tenant moves out, well, that cuts your income in half. In a diversified portfolio with 500 tenants and 5 tenants move out, you have not just cut your portfolio in half, your income in half. So, and lastly, a huge one, simplified estate and tax planning. So you don't have to worry about your 4 kids inheriting your one property in San Diego. You can put your DSTs into whatever part of your trust you want to, say who gets what or what amounts. We've had people, with 3 kids purchase 3 DSTs with their exchange and leave 1 to each kid. We've had people go into 2 DSTs and say each of my kids gets 33% of each of these, or one of my clients, this kid gets 35, this kid gets 35, and this one gets 30. She doesn't call her mom enough. I thought that was one of the best things I actually heard working with my clients. It actually made me laugh in front of them. But simplifying your estate plan, it really can help streamline things so that you're not worried about leaving your children to figure out your estate with your real estate, or even your spouse, your surviving spouse. If you are the one who's always been hands-on, I had a client who was terminally ill and called me and said, the doctors don't know if I have 6 days or 6 months, and I don't want to leave my wife with this responsibility of managing this property. She's never dealt with any of it. She doesn't even know, who to send a check to pay the mortgage. And I went, oh my gosh. So you really need to simplify this if she doesn't want that stress and pressure. So, it can really streamline things for your estate after you pass. And while you're still here, if you don't want to be dealing with it, calling a plumber on a Saturday morning who are you going to get until Monday, or then crawling under the sink yourself, it can really help you when you're in those estate planning years.
And Erica, this is designed for many of the investors who are maybe a little bit more mature in age, you think? Because when you're in like your 30s and 40s and 50s and still building up the portfolio, many of these people still have the patience, but that doesn't say they can't do a 1031 exchange for their properties in that age range. It's just, I think for many people who are maybe like in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe in their 90s, who still have these properties, do you think that this is mainly for that type of target market?
I would say 85% of my clients are over the age of 65. But I do have a client as young as 33. That happens to be the one that I said replaced a roof for $30,000. He had these multiple investments and he was a busy working professional, right? So, I don't know about you. I don't personally have the time with my full day and my 2 kids to manage 6 tenants in my 2 triplexes, So that becomes a lot. You either hire a property manager or you're doing it yourself, and you're hit with these huge expenses, and that's really cutting into your bottom line, right? So people like that who want to go passive to simplify their lives and not just their estate plans, but certainly, the majority of people are over 65. They've held these properties for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. Talking to someone right now who bought their property in the 80s for like $80,000, and now it's, over $1 million. They've practically no cost basis, no loan on it. So it's purely capital gains. And they're trying to figure out, what do I do with this property? How do I leave it to my surviving spouse? How do my children inherit it? And it can really simplify that as you're in that stage of life, for sure. So it's definitely something that mostly people are looking at when they have really large capital gains and are estate planning.
And when you're talking about the cost also, Erica, my mom owned this property in LA, Hollywood area since 1985. Over the last few years, she spent, redoing the roof. It cost her about $70,000 to $80,000.
Wow.
She had to upgrade the electrical, which cost another $30,000 to $40,000. She had to upgrade the HVAC system, which is about another $30,000 to $40,000. So you're looking at like anywhere from $175,000 to $200,000 in upgrades. And it gets very expensive, especially as the properties get older, and as the investors get older.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have to, spend all this money in maintenance. They can just sell it, do a 1031, and roll it into a DST where they can start getting passive cash flow.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So we have a question here, and it says, who is a good fit for DST investing, especially for those tired of managing properties? I think we just went over that, but if you can get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, we did a bit. I gave some examples, but one thing I didn't touch on is that DST investors must be accredited. So if you haven't heard that term before, that's normal. Accreditation is when someone either has a net worth of $1 million beyond their personal residence where they live. So, for investors in San Diego, that usually looks like one or two properties, right? A lot of these properties in San Diego County are worth over $1 million on their own. But having $1 million net worth helps, tells the SEC that, that's what they consider a savvy investor, which, you could have gotten lucky, purchased a house in the 80s, and now it's worth a ton of money, and you may or may not be a savvy investor, but that's kind of their threshold. The other option for accreditation is to have $200,000 or $300,000 filing jointly in income in any given year for the last 2 years, with the expectation to do the same this year. So accreditation is necessary. If you aren't sure if you're accredited, we have a worksheet you could fill out to kind of tally up everything within your net worth, just to check. But yeah, I think, those older investors, typically huge capital gains, those are things that we're looking at for being a good investor prospect for something like a DST.
Perfect. And so the next question that we have, Erica, is what responsibilities do investors avoid when they move their gains into a DST?
So when you do a 1031 exchange, you make the choice, right, into what property you want to go into. And that is essentially your full responsibility when you invest in a DST. You have relinquished all other control of the property. The sponsor that we mentioned earlier, the ones, responsible for management of these properties, they are the ones who get to make all of the decisions. You don't like the color of the outside of the building. The sponsors are the ones that get to choose whether or not to paint it. You've already invested there. They're the ones managing the property. They're responsible for to get the best net operating income possible to distribute to their investors based on their percentage ownership. You relinquish all control. You also relinquish all of your liability, though. So it's as if you're in a limited liability corporation, but you are just an investor passively in real estate.
Perfect. Erica, we have another question here. What are the costs that investors pay when going into a DST? Commissions, costs, anything of that nature. How does that look like on a $1 million gain, getting into 1/100th fractional ownership of a $100 million portfolio? What does that look like? What are the costs they pay going
Another
into
good question. I want to talk to whoever's submitting these questions because they are a savvy investor. So our investors are paying fees to go into DSTs like you would when you're purchasing another property on your own. You may be paying for an inspector. You may be paying for you're certainly paying your realtor. You're paying someone to come in and do some repairs if it's not the responsibility of the seller, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things, those add up. The same types of fees are on the back end of the DSTs as well. So they are part of the investment. You do get to use your 1031 exchange funds to pay for them, right? They're part of the DST. So Each one varies, though, pretty greatly. So we can see fees as low as 7% or as high as 22%. And that is something that we're considering when we're working with investors on what properties to go into with their exchange. So they might even diversify based on the fees, something with a lower fee, 7, 9, 10%, and something with a higher fee to kind of offset each other. Part of a huge consideration for our investors is the cash flow. And the cash flow, though, is based on your equity invested. So not just on the gain, not on the loan, it's cash on cash return. And that is incorporating all of the fees into that. That's part of the consideration. We're looking at a net cash flow. So we always run a net cash flow analysis on the property you are selling, considering selling, or have already sold in your exchange, so that we can look at a cash on cash return, apples to apples. And those fees are being accounted for in your cash on cash return. So you kind of see it more on the back end, but it's hard to say exactly which fees would be there. They vary so much, but it's a huge part of we're going to be transparent and make sure we're showing you those fees when you're investing.
Perfect, Eric. And also, we have another question coming in. When do investors start seeing their passive income as soon as they close on that DST? Is it 6 months?
As soon as they close on their DST.
When did they start? Because obviously they want to see it right away, because they're giving up their cash flowing property, and they're going through this process of selling their property, getting into the 1031. They want to see their money right away. So when does that happen?
Yeah, especially if they've been dealing with problem tenants or vacancies, if they haven't had income for whatever reason, or it's been decreased with fees of paying a lawyer to get someone evicted, for instance, they do want to see that cash flow right away. They can typically see their income, let's say roughly the 15th of the following month. That meaning, so let's say today is the last day of April. If someone closed on their DST investment today, they'd get, 1/30th, because there's 30 days in April, right? Yeah, 30 days in April. So you'd get 1/30th. They'd get net operating income from 1 day of April, roughly around the 15th of May. So you start cash flowing immediately. And it just takes about 2-ish weeks. So cash flow, let's say, hits your bank account the middle of the following month, but it's prorated based on the number of days in the month that you invested. You invested on the 1st, you get cash flow for the whole month around the middle of the following month. But they are cash flowing currently. And that's hugely important to our investors who are trying to get out of a problem property and into something that has, the potential for much stronger return in a lot of cases.
Perfect. Thanks, Erica. And so another question that we have is, what is the average rate of return on DSTs as compared to maybe a CD? Or because sometimes investors, maybe there's a lot of baby boomers out there who maybe just don't want to deal with doing this. They just want to sell it, pay the taxes, and then reinvest whatever is left after they pay their taxes into a CD or into T-bills or just anything else. How does that compare with the rate of return that you've seen with a DST?
Yeah, so 2 points there, and I'll try to remember both of them with my postpartum mommy brain. But the first one is let's start with the average rate of return for DSTs. Typically between about 4 and 6% cash on cash. So a $1 million exchange with $500,000 loan and $500,000 of equity, we're talking about cash on cash on that, $500,000. But you get to, reallocate the loan that you had, because remember, you have to exchange of equal or greater value, meaning you're reinvesting both your equity and your debt, right? So you have to have somewhere to put that debt. And there are many, many DSTs that have leverage on them so that you can reallocate the debt somewhere and not pay capital gains on that. But the cash on cash return standard between about 4 and 6%, some a little lower, some a little higher. And if they're falling outside of that range, we are certainly helping our investors understand why. Let's do some due diligence and some digging into the private placement memorandum. It's like the offering materials that come with DSTs to see, is there a reason why this is lower or higher? Are they higher fees? Are they a little riskier investment? Things like that. But when our investors typically first hear that it's a 4 to 6% return. They go, well, I could get that in a CD. Sure. But first, you have to pay all of your taxes if you sell and you don't 1031 exchange, right? Yeah, Chris, that smirk. We know there are investors who think I'm gonna do fine. I'm just gonna sell my property, pay my 20%, and they're forgetting all the other fees that add them up to 37.5% of their total property value, right? So now let's say you take this huge cut. Now you have only about 65% of your property's value to invest in something like a CD. When does that catch up? If it's making 5%, let's say, you started, here's where your property value is. Well, here's what it is after the gains, and you're making 5% here. How long does it take to catch back up to the total property value? Not even before we even get into, how much the DST is cash flowing. So we do have a tool that I can run through with investors that compares a cash out. We do a cash out analysis. If an investor is interested in reaching out to me, we can set that up for them and just kind of do a comparison between a 5% cash flowing DST, 5% cash flowing CD, or whatever your investment advisor, says that they can make for you. I had someone come in and say, oh, my investment advisor said they could definitely get me 6% in the market. And I said, first of all, they're making you promises that I don't believe a fiduciary should make promises on what they say they can return. But, okay, that 6%, let's say, but you're taking a 32% was his tax responsibility, tax liability, 32% cut. Now you make 6% versus keeping your whole gain or your whole investment rolled over via 1031 exchange. And let's say you make 4%. At what point does that 6 catch up to the 4? So we'll do an analysis like that to see how long it would take to recuperate what you've lost by paying taxes on the sale.
Great answer, Erica. Another question that we have for you. I mean, you're getting fired with all these questions.
I love
all these questions. What mistakes do investors make when they wait too long to go passive?
The biggest thing is those deferred maintenance fees. So we do have a resource available for our investors and for professionals who are also with us on the podcast. Estate planning attorneys often ask us this, and realtors and brokers. They're reaching out saying, my investor isn't sure they want to sell, but they think they have some repairs coming up. Okay, great. Well, let's look at what that's going to cost them. Again, I'm going to keep going back to my client with the $30,000 roof replacement. He had literally 2 triplexes, same town, same age. And he goes, this just cost me 30 grand. Deferred maintenance on this other one, I'm looking at another 30 grand, right? So if he waited too long, he felt like he waited too long on the first one. He already had to replace the roof. That cut $30,000 into his equity that he could have rolled over via an exchange. And he said, I'm getting rid of that one. I'm done. Let's do this one too, because I don't want to be faced with more deferred maintenance. So I have a guide that does offer some clarity to brokers and agents, other professionals, or just for the investor directly, to show you an idea of what you should be putting aside every month if you haven't replaced your roof. Even a refrigerator, that could be $2,000 into your bottom line at the end of the year. So deferred maintenance costs are huge, and that's the biggest hit to your bottom line if you're waiting to go passive.
Perfect. Erica, there's another question here. These are all, we've got some really great questions that are coming up. How can DSTs help investors scale faster without taking on more stress?
Great question. We do have some good questions, Chris. I want every single person who's submitting these questions to hit me up, reach out. My contact info has been on the bottom of the screen a few times. But DSTs can really help investors scale faster without stress by maybe diversifying. Some DSTs have a higher growth potential than others. So we'd be looking at that if that is one of the higher goals than just income. So something like, an investment in San Diego, you do have a lot of growth potential. What is the return potential, the cash flow potential on a property like that when you do have a lot of landlord restrictions, tenant tenant favorable states like California. So you can potentially scale more by diversifying into different types of portfolios. You can, when we do the cash out return analysis too, you can see like where is your growth over the course of 10 years, with this being the predictable income from a DST. And we go through the goals for each investor individually, because it that can drastically vary, one investor to the next, what their goals are, therefore which DSTs they go into. So if scaling's your bigger concern than just cash flow, that's definitely a consideration. But the stress factor is the biggest part, right? So a lot of our investors are either too busy, like my young investors, to be worrying about their properties, or they're older and they don't want to be, calling plumbers to see who will come on a weekend instead of on Monday morning, or crawl under the sink themselves. So the stress factor is like pretty much fully removed once you've invested in the DST. You're only, if you're stressing about it, then I think you're probably not working with the right investment advisor, because we want to remove all the stress from your situation. But ideally, your stress is gone once you've completed your exchange. You sign that last DocuSign, and we want you to sit back and wait for the cash flow to hit your bank account the following month.
That's fantastic, Erica. And normally, what is the term that they have to stay within that portfolio of investments? Because I know that there's like a time frame where the sponsor would like to eventually, create that profit margin for the buildings or the portfolio, and then eventually, when they've reached a certain rate of return, they want to go ahead and sell it. So,
yeah,
how long do they need to be? And they can't touch that money during that whole time frame when they're in that DST, correct?
Typically, yes. You could think of it similarly to kind of passively investing in the stock market. Sure, you have in the stock market, you'd like technically have a vote. Like I invest in Starbucks because I go there multiple times a week, so I might as well be invested in their stock. But I get my vote in Starbucks once a year. But other than that, I'm passively investing in Starbucks, right? And I can, buy and sell Starbucks stock at will. Well, with DSTs, you can only invest during the initial, let's consider it similar to an IPO, the initial offering time period, right? So like the DST, let's say, is $100 million retail portfolio. And we have 100 investors who equally invest $1 million, just for the sake of simplicity. So if each of those 100 investors got an equal say, and the sponsor wasn't the sole responsibility party responsible for selling the property or making decisions like painting it and this and that, you'd have to get all 100 investors to agree on every decision. And that would become really complicated. So they get the full responsibility, and the same goes for selling the property, right? So they are responsible for the disposition of this property at the end of its investment life. Typical time frame is 5 to 7 years. If an investor did want to get out early, they'd have to reach out to the sponsor and ask them if someone wanted to, potentially buy their ownership interest. I own 1%. Is there someone who wants to buy half of this from me so I can have some cash? Possible, I suppose. It's not really typically done. It's just not something that our investors have come, face to face with. Want to keep some cash out, we're going to talk to them about that at the time of the investment. So I'm investing $1 million, or I have $1 million exchange rather, and we're going to talk to them about, do you see a need for having cash on hand in the near future? If so, we're going to advise them to keep some out, talk to their tax professional, see how much they want to pay the gains on, and just have that cash in the bank. But it isn't considered an illiquid investment. Imagine you buy $1 million home. You can't just sell off one bathroom to get 15 grand out of that home, right? So kind of consider it, this is my investment during the lifetime of the DST, right? So 5 to 7 years is the average, could be a little shorter, could be a little longer. And we're going to talk to each investor about those time frames at the time of investment as well. Chris, I think you're muted.
That's fantastic, Erica. I'm back. So I think that that's great, and that you do provide an analysis I think you provide maybe three options, right? When looking at their portfolio, you look at, if they were decided to keep it, number one, what's that rate of return? You're going to continue that rate of return, dealing with tenants, dealing with the tenants, toilets and trash. Number two, if you just sold the property and you paid all the taxes of about 30 to 40% in taxes, your buying power goes down from 100% to 60 to 70%,
Yeah.
right? And then the third option that we discussed before was then, okay, so if you go into a DST, you roll over, your gains into this DST, this is what you would be seeing. So you provide three different options and you go over all those numbers with the clients. Depending upon their risk tolerance, you can suggest, triple net leases, a warehouse, an Amazon warehouse, a commercial property, industrial. Obviously, hotels are a little riskier in investment. But then you've got the senior living, student housing, multifamilies also that you recommend. Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing is that not all DSTs are created equal. So what are you looking for when recommending a DST? Because there's, you said that there's a lot out there, but it's really only a small percentage that are really worthy of recommending to your client. Can you go over that really quick?
Yeah. We at Legacy Investments in Real Estate, we work with a broker dealer, Concord Investment Services, and they do our first level of due diligence. I like to use this example when I'm talking to clients for the first time, worried about the quality of the properties. My very first due diligence trip was with a sponsor in SoCal. I went to their office and they showed us two photos side by side. The first photo was just the exterior of the building, beautiful apartment building. Definitely something I would, look at and go, this looks like a great investment. It's not that old. It has a lot of potential. It has like a lot of amenities, a pool, a dog park, yada, yada, all these things that look really, really great on paper. The photo next to it had a, similar shape, outline of the building with a bunch of dark blue streaks running through it. And they said, what do you think this is? And I went, that looks like water. It's cold on this infrared photo. So it was an infrared photo that they took of the exterior of the building. And they found out that they asked, the seller about it. They found out that this building had water damage a couple years prior and they had fixed it. But they didn't go deep into the walls and make sure that they were fully dried out. So there was still water damage in the building that just hadn't been, they didn't just replace the interior drywall and paint it up again and, replace the carpet. It was like deep damage in the building. So that's, the type of due diligence that these sponsors could be doing on these properties. At our broker dealer level, they are deep diving into the PPMs, those private placement memorandums. Think of it similar to a prospectus when a company IPOs. They could be 200 or 300 pages long. And they're going deep into it to see things like who are the principals at the sponsor? What is the track record of each of the principals and the properties that the sponsor has, offered to the investors in the past? How many of their DSTs have gone full cycle? What have those returns look like? Have they been responsible with their spending? What is the type of returns that they're getting, both cash flow wise and IRR when they sell a property? So they're doing a deep dive into the financials, what type of loan is on the property, if there is one, if there isn't one, we're considering who is that beneficial for. So they're going to go into each of these 200 to 300 pages with a fine-tooth comb. And very often our broker dealer finds things that they think are not yet appropriate to be, offering to our investors. They're going to go back to the sponsor and say, hey, we didn't see this in your PPM. We want to see an environmental study, so they're going to be asking questions like that to the sponsors. And oftentimes we're getting a supplement to the PPM just because we are asking these types of questions. And then my team, once they're available to us through the broker dealer, we're doing another layer of due diligence to see, like you said, you could go into something like a hotel that's riskier with a higher potential return, maybe 6%, versus something like an apartment complex with 4.25% return. When we're comparing those things, who is which type appropriate for? A younger investor who's still working full time and says, great, I'm going to invest in a hotel, and if something like COVID hit that 6% is not significant in my overall income and portfolio, versus my 85-year-old investor for whom this very steady, stable 4.25% return is much more appropriate, or diversification across that spectrum. So lots and lots of layers of diligence that you or I as an individual investor may not be doing on our own. You're getting it at the sponsor level, the attorney level, writing the PPMs, the broker dealer level, and then working with us at Legacy.
Perfect. Well, we have one last question for you. Let's go ahead and see what that question is. What is the biggest misconception about DSTs? From Ruben, Austria.
Yeah. Great question. Biggest misconception. The first one, I think, I don't know that this is particularly a misconception, but the first thing that comes to mind is there's another type of tax deferral strategy called a DST. That's the deferred sales trust. These are not the same thing. Deferred sales trusts are not 1031 eligible. DSTs are.
Is that similar to a REIT, Erica? Is that similar to a REIT or not? Is that different?
No, the deferred sales trust is totally different. We won't even dive into it because it's a totally separate thing. It has nothing to do with real estate. The REIT is the next misconception I was going to bring up. A lot of people think that they are the same or, too similar. But a REIT is not eligible for a 1031 exchange, right, Chris? 1031 exchange. So I would say this is a huge misconception I get, especially with older investors who may be invested in REITs, REIT, real estate investment trusts. There were some REITs that, kind of didn't do so well a while back. And there's some older investors who are really, really hesitant to passively invest in real estate because of their history investing in REITs, but they're not the same thing. REITs are large scale portfolios of real estate. They can also include other investments, stocks, bonds, money market funds. Up to 25% of a REIT portfolio can be non-real estate investments. DSTs are strictly real estate and physical real estate, typically one to several pieces of properties, maybe in a portfolio. But they are, actively working for the investor, and exactly what you're investing in at the time of investment. So with a REIT, the REIT sponsors, the REIT companies can be buying and selling real estate in and out of the REIT at will. They don't have to tell you, Chris, let's say you invest in this multifamily in Columbus, Ohio, and that's what you own when you own the DST, if that's what you chose. Let's say that multifamily in Columbus, Ohio is in a REIT. Well, great. There's maybe 100 other properties in the REIT, and they could sell that whenever they want. They don't have to ask you as an investor. You're passive. So let's say they've sold that apartment complex. Well, now what do you own? You don't get to choose. The REIT sponsor is choosing the buying and selling process, which is another reason that they're not not eligible for a 1031 exchange. 1031 on that ID form, you're saying, I'm selling 123 Main Street and I'm buying such and such apartment complex in Columbus, Ohio at this address. You have to say exactly what you're selling, exactly what you're buying. You can't do that with a REIT. So that is another huge misconception. There is a route to get into REITs through DSTs, some DSTs. That's a conversation one-on-one with investors at the time of their investment.
All right, Erica, we have another comment. 1031 exchange is a great tax saving strategy for investors.
Yes, it is.
Finish that thought.
It is huge. These investors who have been building up their portfolio, especially, you have capital gains. I mean, you're just going to be you could be losing, like Chris said, 30 to 40% of your total investment amount if you don't 1031 exchange. I think your name was Gabrielle Renee that came up. I saw MBA after your name. You were smart that you earned that MBA. Yeah, it's definitely a huge wealth building tool to do a 1031 exchange, whether you're going the route of DSTs or buying and selling property on your own. 1031s are the huge wealth building tool.
Right, Erica. So really quick, let's kind of go over this really quick. Let's do and discuss some of the great takeaways, because many baby boomers are afraid to lose money, obviously because they've created so much wealth or they have so much equity. What are some of the fears that they have, and how can you make them feel more comfortable knowing that, hey, you're going to do your due diligence, we're going to do an analysis for you, we're going to help you make that the best decision for your investment, so that obviously every investment is a risk. There's a lot of risk involved with anything. You could lose your money, half of it, all of it, maybe. I mean, what are some of the things that you tell investors so that, they don't have that fear?
Yeah. We go through several stages before we help investors make the decision for their 1031 exchange. We have kind of what we like to refer to as a legacy analysis. We are helping them determine, should they keep their property? Is that what's going to help them hit their goals? Should they sell it and pay the capital gains, have some cash on hand, invest it elsewhere? Should they be doing a 1031 exchange? And if so, into what type of property, whether that's a DST or not? So kind of 3 levels of keep, sell, exchange. And part of that is going through a cash flow analysis. So you see this QR code up on the screen. So if you're watching this on the computer, you can scan it with your phone, or you see the web address down there at the bottom, of course, my contact info. But if you want to run a cash flow analysis on your current real estate, I would say that's typically the first step our investors take to see what their true net return is on that property. Some people go, I'm making $5,000 a month. That's a 5% return on my property. Well, is it? Or you're paying the landlord, or you're paying the landscaping. You are the landlord. You're paying the landscaping. Maybe you're paying a property manager. Maybe you have HOA fees. Are you responsible for any of the utilities, the water, things like that? So we're running a cash flow analysis to see what is their true net income on that property. Are they making as much as they think they are?
And Erica, do you get these numbers from their Schedule E as well? Like maybe you go through their taxes and then they itemize all those write-offs. I mean, you implement that in your analysis so that you can get the true number of what their actual rate of return is on that investment, correct?
Yeah, we have a form they can fill out, or we can even just go through it live, and we're going to let our software, it's a proprietary software that we have, and it's going to run this net cash flow analysis. It's pretty darn thorough. We're making all those considerations to go, what's eating into your bottom line? That $5,000 a month in rent is not really $5,000 when you have all these things that you're, that you're paying. So that could be step 1, cash flow analysis. And then we're doing a deep dive into their goals. We want to know, are you more concerned about appreciation? If so, maybe a DST is not the right spot for you. Maybe you should be buying more real estate in San Diego. Maybe you should be scaling up from a single family home to a duplex. What are your goals? Is it to simplify your estate plan? Is it to just have more stable and steady income? Things like that. So a deep dive into their goals, financial, lifestyle goals. Do you want to be passive? Do you hate dealing with a plumber on a Saturday morning when you'd rather be golfing? Like my dad prefers every Saturday morning, so he doesn't want those landlord responsibilities anymore. And then financial, lifestyle, estate planning goals, simplifying things. The goals are a huge thing, and they're so different for every investor. Are you riskier? Are you more risk averse? Would you rather diversify or keep your money more in one spot so you can do a subsequent exchange in the future and buy another single family home or duplex or something? They're just so drastically different for everyone. Deep dive into your goals and then layer it on with the cash flow analysis, the tax out analysis, and then specific DSTs from there.
Yep. And really and truly what it is, Erica, from what I see, my takeaway from this whole, DST investment is the freedom that people will get, the freedom from the stress, from the anxiety, the freedom from having to deal with tenants, the freedom to be able to vacation, to, spend more time with your grandkids, or just to get away from all the legal issues that you're faced with. Sometimes a lot of people are faced with a lot of legal issues that are going into these different investment properties. So it really and truly is a freedom. And Erica is here to help all of our viewers, all of our investors to really, really and truly find out if this is the right investment for them. There's never any pressure. Erica is so great at analyzing everything and putting the numbers, in front of you so that you can determine what's best for you. So Erica, thank you so much. Erica Traulsen,
you're welcome.
Legacy Real Estate and Investments. Thank you for going on a deep dive of the true benefits of going into a DST. And now, before you get into the DST, you got to go through the 1031 to get into the DST, which I work with Erica so much, and you're in good hands. We want the best for all of our investors, and she's a professional, she's an expert, and she's the one to do it with
a smile.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica, for joining us. We really appreciate you. Have a fantastic day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next 1031 Exchange Live.